Last lecture, we spoke about representing an image, and we also saw a few operations that you perform on images. Let's quickly review them and then move ahead. We talked about three types of operations: point, local, and global. And we did leave one question for you to find out about. Hope you put in some effort to answer that question. The question was, how do you perform histogram equalization? So we did talk about an example of linear contrast stretching, and histogram equalization is a more complex variation of a contrast stretching operation. So let's now see how histogram equalization, which is a very popular operation for improving the quality of images, let's see how that is done. So if you had I to be an image with m by n pixels, m cross n pixels, and let's assume that I max is the maximum image intensity value, and let's also create a histogram of the image which we denote as h of I. Remember that a histogram is nothing but binning your entire range of image values and counting how many pixels lie in each range. It's simply a frequency count in bins. So now you can integrate h of I to obtain a cumulative distribution C of I for your image. Okay. We'll see an example of this in a moment. And the cumulative distribution C of k would simply be given by, if you go from 1 to k, where k be a particular intensity value, you count the number of pixels until that particular intensity value. Histogram would be about binning it individually. Cumulative takes it as a accumulation, and then you normalize by the number of pixels. So here is an example of a cumulative distribution. This red curve here is a cumulative distribution, which simply adds up the histogram as you go through from the lowest intensity to the highest intensity. So the final transformed image after doing histogram equalization is simply I max, the maximum intensity, into CPIJ, which is what is the cumulative distribution at a particular point. So in this particular figure, if you saw, we are saying here that if you had a gray level intensity 90 in an image, in the histogram equalized image, you see what is the cumulative proportion of 90 in that image. So in this case, it happens to be 0.29, and you simply multiply that by I max, the maximum intensity. Rather, an intuitive way of understanding histogram equalization is you try to look at the distribution of intensities in your particular image, and let's say a lot of your intensities was lying between 200 and 250, which means a pixel with intensity 90, there would not be much cumulative distribution in that space, and hence in the histogram equalized image it would get a lower value than another pixel with a higher intensity. That's the idea of histogram equalization. You can again read up the references for this course, either Simon Kinz's book or Siliski's book, to understand more. Let's move on now to understanding what filters of an image are. So we did talk about operations. Let's now formalize that into a concept called a filter. So an image filter is typically a local operation, can be global, but typically a local operation, where you modify image pixels based on some function of a local neighborhood of that pixel. Exactly what we defined a local operation to be in the previous lecture. Let's take this example. You have a 3x3 image here, and you have the pixel values indicated in this particular location, in this particular image. Let's assume that you're going to use some filter and get the output at the central pixel to be 4. Can you guess what the function is? Each pixel, so in this particular case, it simply turns out to be an average of all the pixels in the neighborhood. You could also make this more complex and introduce a filter which has specific values in different locations, and you simply do a dot product of every value in the location in the image with the corresponding value in the location in the filter. So this filter is also sometimes called mask or kernel. These terms are overloaded in other fields. They mean different things in other fields. But when we talk about image processing or low-level computer vision, or today even in computer vision, we call them filters or masks or kernels. So here is another example of a linear filter where you take this particular kernel that you see here and simply do a linear combination of the original image with this kernel, and you get the output to be 6.5. Why is it called a linear filter? Because the output is a linear combination of the local neighborhood as defined by the combination in the kernel. Let's formally define this now. So this operation that we saw on the earlier slide can be formally now written as, if you had a kernel of size 2k plus 1 cross 2k plus 1. So in our case, if we took a 3 cross 3 filter, then k would be 1. Okay. And then we define this operation to be correlation because it's simply a dot product between two quantities. So your input I and then your output G. Your output G at a particular location I comma j is given by, the first term here is simply an averaging term, and you're simply taking the sum of of an index going from minus k to k, v going from minus k to k, and you simply add up all the pixels in that neighborhood. This is simply correlation, or also what is known as cross correlation. And in cross correlation, the key difference here is that you now have non-uniform weights where you specify what should be the linear combination. So if you're going to add up all the pixels in a neighborhood, should you simply add up an average, or should you multiply each of those elements in that neighborhood by some value? If so, what value? And that value is given by h of u comma v. And this is called a cross correlation between h and I. This is one of the simplest operations. So we've only formalized the operation that we did on the earlier slide. So cross correlation is formally denoted by G of h and I. As I already mentioned, it can be viewed as a dot product between the local neighborhood and the kernel or the filter or the mask for that particular pixel. The entries of the kernel or the mask or the filter are called the filter coefficients. So on the previous slide, the example that we saw, let's go back. These values in this kernel are called the filter coefficients. Let's see the example of the moving average operation that we saw on the last lecture as a linear filter. So we said that given an image, the moving average filter gives you an estimate by removing certain kinds of noise, where at each location you simply do an average of the local neighborhood in the input image. So if we saw this as a cross correlation operation or as a linear filter, what would the filter be? Remember, it has to take an average of the values in a neighborhood. The answer is It would simply be 1 by 9 in all of those elements. 1 by 9 is simply to normalize the entire set of values. So obviously, if you were taking a 5 by 5 window, this would end up being 1 by 25 times 1, 1, 1, 1 in a 5 cross 5 filter. So this becomes your linear filter for your moving average operation that we saw in the last lecture can help remove certain kinds of noise. Okay, here is a more real world example of a moving average filter. So you can see here the input image, that's your input image, and on the right you see the output image, where you can see that the output is an averaged version or the smoothed version, or you can also call it a blurry version, because you're smudging. By taking a local average, you're smudging the image at different pixels. So this is also sometimes known as a box filter, because the filter coefficients are all exactly the same. So it's a box in that sense. 1 by 9 in all those locations as we saw on the earlier slide. Okay, now let's try to complicate this a bit and say we don't want a box filter. We want to take an average, but we want to take an average in such a way that the middlemost element should have the highest influence on the output. One neighbors away should have the next level of influence. 2 neighbors away should have a lower level of influence, and so on and so forth, depending on the size of your filter. Remember, you could do an average not just with a 3 cross 3 neighborhood, you could do it with a 5 cross 5 neighborhood, 7 cross 7 neighborhood, and that is something that you have to define when you perform the operation. So a Gaussian average filter, which looks somewhat like this, okay, where you can see that the middlemost element has the highest influence, 1 neighbors have the next level of influence, and so on and so forth. And 1 by 16 is simply a normalizing factor, because you do not want the pixel intensity in the output image to blow up. You want it to be within the predefined range, and that's the reason you need to normalize. So this filter is a discrete version of your Gaussian function, of a 2D Gaussian function, as we define like this. And it gives you an averaging filter again, because it again smoothens out or blurs your pixels at different locations, but it now does not do it in a box filter way, but gives more importance to a central pixel. So if you took the same example that we saw a couple of slides back and see the box filter and the Gaussian filter, you see that there are slight differences in how these two filters work. If you observe very carefully, you will see that the box filter has some blockiness artifacts, whereas the Gaussian filter does not have these artifacts. Why? Because the box filter does not smoothen out at the edges, but keeps the same value across the entire neighborhood, and that can introduce certain kinds of blockiness artifacts. What are other kinds of linear filters that you can do? We will see more and more of them as we go in this course. But another typical example could be what is known as an edge filter. So given an image, you may want to extract the edges in the image. So let's take this example on the slide. So you have this input image. Let's assume that you want to extract, say, some vertical edges, some horizontal edges. Then the question here is, what would be your filter, kernel or mask? Okay, so the last set of images here are simply the absolute value of the output image. We'll see more on edge filters a bit later, but the question for you now is, what would be H if you simply wanted to extract edge information from your input image? For purposes of convenience, let's take let's stay with the 3x3 filter. Let's not increase the size. We can though in practice, but we're not going to increase it now. If you have not guessed the filter already, the filter would look something like this. A vertical filter would look something like this, where you have -1, -1, -1 on one side and 1, 1, 1 on the other side. So effectively, the filter would look for places in the image where there is a significant difference between the left of the pixel and the right of the pixel, vertically speaking, and it would try to exaggerate those pixels in the output image. A horizontal edge filter would do the same thing, but along the horizontal directions. This 1/9 here is again a normalizing factor, but you typically do not need that in an edge filter, because we are not interested in the absolute edge value, but we are interested in high intensities where there's an edge. We'll talk about this a bit more when we go into edge detection a few lectures down the line. So let's ask an important question now. So let's take an impulse signal. For those of you with a signal processing background, you'll be able to appreciate this. So let's take an impulse signal, which for us, let's say we define it as a single white pixel in the middle of an entire black image. We're going to call that as an impulse signal. And if you take a particular filter, let's say the filter is given by a set of values A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I. So it's neither a box filter nor a Gaussian filter. It's just a set of values that you have organized as a filter. What would the output be if you use cross correlation? You can work this out a bit carefully by yourself, but you'll find that the answer would be something like this. You would have an output image where the output is completely flipped. So you would have the bottom right value going to the top left and the top left value going to the bottom right. Rather, your output will be a double flipped version of your input. You can try out working out cross correlation pixel by pixel and you'll realize this yourself. For example, the output at this pixel here, so let me perhaps erase these. The output at this pixel here is simply going to be taking this input pixel and placing this kernel exactly as it is there, and it happens that this white value is the only value that will get multiplied by this 1. All other kernel values will get multiplied by the corresponding black, which is 0, and will not have any bearing on the output, which means the output at this particular location is going to be white. And you keep doing this over and over again at every pixel, and you'll see that, okay, let's take one more example. So if you took this pixel on the output, which would be this pixel on the input, so you take the same kernel, place it here as a 3x3 neighborhood, and you would see that the only pixel, the only value that would get highlighted is the one which is here, which would get multiplied by 1. Everything else would get multiplied by a 0 because of a black, and the output would be black itself because that's the value here. You can do this for every pixel and realize that the output here is going to be double flipped. This is something that we did not expect. We thought a typical identity operation, for example an impulse signal, we would expect that if you perform the operation with the kernel, you get the kernel itself. But sadly here we notice that you get the output to be double flipped. What do we do if we want an operation like an identity operation, where if you take an impulse signal and you do that operation with the kernel, you should get the kernel itself, which, as you can see, does not happen when you do cross correlation. That introduces us to the operation of convolution. So convolution is very similar to cross correlation. The main difference here is, given a kernel of size 2k plus 1 cross 2k plus 1, given an input image I and a filter H, your output is, but this time you're going to say it's H of u comma v into I of I minus u and j minus v. What are you doing here? When you're doing the operation itself, you're double flipping the filter so that your output turns out to become the same as the filter itself. Okay, so probably this slide has a minor issue. There should be a normalizing factor here, but it really does not matter in practice as long as you normalize the values in the filter itself. So if your filter values are not normalized, you have to explicitly normalize at the end. But if we assume that the filter values are not normalized, this normalization will not be required. Okay. So as I just mentioned, convolution is equivalent to flipping the filter in both directions, bottom to top and right to left, and then applying cross correlation. So convolution is typically denoted in this manner, where H is the filter and I is the image. So here is an example of how it works. The same example now. You have the impulse signal. You have your filter H of uv. You're going to double flip it now, which means your double flipping is going to result in this filter on the right. Now you perform a cross correlation with this double flip filter, and you'll end up getting this as the output because you're doing a cross correlation with this filter now. But the output now is the same as the filter that we gave as input to the operation. Why do we really need to do this? We'll answer in a moment. One reason, as we said, is we wanted some kind of an identity function, but we'll just come back in a moment. Before we answer that question, if you recall this slide that we had when we talked about the history of computer vision, we talked about these early experiments in the late 1950s that established that there are simple and complex cells in the mammalian visual cortex. There has been follow-up work along these lines that have showed that simple cells in the visual cortex perform simple linear spatial summation over their receptive fields. Receptive field is simply what part of the input image are you focusing on while performing an operation. For example, when you take a 3x3 convolution filter or a correlation filter, your receptive field is of the size 3x3 because that is the part of the input image that you'll focus on while performing one such operation. Obviously, you keep repeating this at every pixel in your image and you get the output. But when you do one particular operation, your receptive field is 3x3. So coming back to this point, so this work here in the late 1970s showed that simple cells actually perform linear spatial summation. So it seems to hint that correlation and convolution could be operations that we could use to perform operations on images similar to the mammalian visual cortex. It happens that correlation and convolution are both what are known as linear shift invariant operators. Okay. Those of you with the linear systems or signal processing background may already know this. Linearity means that if you had an image I and if you had two filters H0 and H1, okay, then I operation H0, the operation could be convolution or correlation, and then I operation H1, whether you add up the filters first or add up the images, the output images after performing the operations of the individual filters, they both will be the same. Okay. This is linearity or what is also known as the superposition principle. The other property here is shift invariance. This an important property, something that can account for why convolution is used to this day in deep learning and so on and so forth. It's an important property. It simply states that shifting or translating a signal commutes with applying an operator. I'll try to make that a bit more clearer. Let's say you have, okay, let me try to explain this slightly differently. This is the general definition here, but if you had H to be a certain image I and G to be a certain image I hat, so your I hat is simply a translated version of your I. Why is it a translated version? Because for every pixel at I hat, which is defined at I comma j, the value is given by what was the value in I at I plus k and j plus l. So it's like moving the entire image in I a little bit left, or depending on what k is. K could also be negative, so it could be moving left or negative or right. So this is simply a translated version of your image I. So now if you have a filter f, whether you convolve it with I hat or you convolve it with H at the other locations, at the translated locations, you will get the same output. Rather, this seems trivial to you at the first go, but this is an important property. But what it tells is, if you have a filter f and you apply it at, say, a particular location of the input image, say at 1, 1 of that image matrix, it will have the same output as applying the same filter at 3, 3, provided these two regions have exactly the same intensity values. Why is it important? If you have a cat at the left top of the image or a cat at the right bottom of the image, if you use a particular filter, it will give you the same output whether the cat is located at the left top of the image or the bottom right of the image. And that's what is shift invariance, and that helps convolution induce translation invariance into any approach that uses convolution. So another way of saying that is the effect of the operator is the same everywhere in the image as long as the image has the same characteristic. If two images have the same characteristic, but the object of that corresponding to the characteristic is at different locations in that image, the corresponding output at those locations will be the same for a given filter. Why do we need this in computer vision? I just explained that. Okay, so this is an important slide. Convolution, we said that cross correlation unfortunately did not help us maintain an identity with the impulse function, whereas convolution did. And convolution has many more mathematical properties that make it an elegant operation. The first one is it's commutative. So A convolution B is the same as B convolution A. So this is an interesting and important property, because this simply says that if A was your image I and B was your filter H, whether you call A your image or B your filter or the other way around doesn't matter, because the operation is commutative. The second property is associativity, which says A convolution B convolution C is the same as A convolution B convolution C. Why is this important? If you took an image given by A here, and you had two different filters B and C, now you can either apply the filter H1 on I first, get an output, and then apply filter H2, or you can pre-compute the convolution of H1 and H2 and simply apply the output of that to the image. We'll see some tangible, useful applications of this property a bit later. Other properties are its distributive over addition. So A convolution B plus C is A convolution B plus A convolution C. I think we saw it with linearity too. It factors out scalars. K A convolution B is A convolution KB, which is nothing but K times A convolution B. And as we already saw with, if you had an unit impulse, which is defined by say a vector like this, so it has a 1 in the center, 0 everywhere else. Remember, this is a one-dimensional impulse. In a two-dimensional impulse, we already saw an example where you have a white value in the middle of the image, black everywhere. Then A convolution, this unit impulse will be A itself, which for us did not hold with cross correlation. So convolution has a few elegant properties which you will see helps us in many applications. Another important property of convolution is the notion of separability. So a typical convolution operator requires k-square operations per pixel, assuming k cross k to be your kernel. So in a 3 cross 3 kernel, if you look at a particular output pixel, you need 9 operations, 3 into 3 operations to be able to compute the value at that output pixel. This can be costly because if an image is of a very large size, remember we have to repeat the same operations for every pixel in the image. So it could be 9 into n square, where n square is the size of the image, assuming you have an n cross n image. How do we reduce cost? Can we do something to reduce the cost? It happens that in certain cases you can. For certain kinds of filters, you can speed up the convolution operation by first performing a 1D horizontal convolution followed by a 1D vertical convolution. So you first convolve along each row. Remember that the entire operation of convolution, while we defined it in an image processing context, which is the reason why we took two-dimensional filters like 3 cross 3, so on and so forth. Convolution is a more general signal processing concept that can also be defined for one-dimensional signals, can be defined for three-dimensional signals, or for any other dimension for that matter. Just that the kernel or the filter that you have would have to be defined in that dimension. Right? So if you're performing a 1D convolution along every row of the image, you would define a one-dimensional filter. A one-dimensional filter would be something like this: 1 by 9, 1 by 9, not 1 by 9, in this case it will become 1 by 3, 1 by 3, and 1 by 3. Because there are 3 values, if you're normalizing, it would be 1 by 3. This is a one-dimensional filter. What we saw as a block filter or a box filter was 1 by 9s in a 3 cross 3 location. Similarly, a vertical filter would be 1 by 3, 1 by 3, 1 by 3. And we can perform exactly the convolution operation that we discussed. We still have to double flip and then do it only along every row of an image or only along every column of an image. If you do that, you only require 2k operations, because every row would require, every 1D kernel would require k operations. Every 1D vertical convolution would require k operations. You only need a total of k plus k operations. This becomes cheaper than k square. Remember that for a 5 cross 5 filter, a k square would mean 25 operations, while a 2k would mean 10 operations. And this difference becomes more prominent when k becomes larger and larger and larger. One point to add here is, you did see these kernels here to be 1 by 3, 1 by 3, 1 by 3, or in a box filter 1 by 3 everywhere around. Remember, when you have filters such as this, your double flipping really does not matter, because the matrix or the filter in this particular case is exactly the same everywhere. In such a case, convolution and correlation will give you exactly the same output. So to make this a bit clearer, so we define a kernel K to be separable if you can write it as an outer product of two 1D vectors, v and h. If you can do that, then such a kernel is said to be separable, because you can separate it into two 1D kernels. It's said to be separable, and then you can use this trick to reduce the number of operations from k square to k by first performing a 1D convolution with v and then performing a 1D convolution with h. Here is an example. So if you have a 2D kernel which is given by this, do you recall this kernel? This was called the Gaussian kernel. We saw it a few slides back. You can write this as an outer product of v and h, where both are equal and can be given by 1 by 4, 1, 2, 1. So then what you do is you simply take this kernel, do a convolution in one dimension, take the transpose of it, do a one-dimensional convolution in the other dimension, rows and columns. Should v and h be the same always? Not necessarily. Here is another example where you have a filter such as this. Do you recall this filter? In case you don't recall, this was your edge filter. So in this case, as you can see, this can be written as an outer product of v is equal to 1 by 4 times this vector and h is equal to half times this vector. You can test it out to see if this actually is the outer product, but it happens to be this way. So now you can replace your 2D convolution by two 1D convolutions, which can help reduce the cost. But this raises one question: how can you look at a kernel and tell if it's separable? So I said that if a kernel can be written as an outer product of two vectors, then you can say that the kernel is separable. But why? How can you say this? One option is to visually look at it and try to work out various combinations and find out which gives you the outer product. Okay, you can probably work that out with the example on the previous slide and see. But there is a slightly more principled way to do this. The principal way to do this is you can take the singular value decomposition of your kernel. Okay. Remember, the singular value decomposition of any matrix is given by U sigma V transpose, and that can be written this way, where U is a matrix whose column vectors are Ui, V is a matrix whose column vectors are Vi's, so that's what Ui's and Vi's are, so each of them is vectors, and sigma I are the elements in your diagonal matrix sigma, right? If sigma is your diagonal matrix, that's given by sigma 1 till sigma k, assuming k is a k cross k is a k cross k matrix. Then this is your standard singular value decomposition. So if you write out the singular value decomposition of k, then it happens that root sigma 1 u1 and root sigma 1 v1 will be the vertical and horizontal kernels. Try working this out or checking on this to see if this actually works with the two examples that we saw on a couple of slides back, the Gaussian kernel and the edge kernel. So let's talk about a few practical issues when you actually start using convolution or even correlation as an operation. What do you think should be the ideal size for a filter? We talked about a filter being 3 cross 3. We said it can be 5 cross 5, 7 cross 7, so on and so forth. But what is the ideal size? Obviously, it depends on a given application, but the bigger the mask or the filter, more neighbors are going to contribute. There's going to be a smaller noise variance of the output. So for example, if you had, say, some kind of a noise that got introduced in certain parts of your input image, if your convolution is with a very small local neighborhood, that noise will have an impact on the output. But if you took a larger mask, then that noise will get subdued among the other pixels that you consider for that linear filter or for that local operation. It can also result, on the other hand, in a bigger noise spread, because if you had noise in your input, if you took a bigger filter, the impact of that noise is now going to be on a larger region. Remember, we talked about the receptive field. So a larger number of pixels in your output image will be impacted by that noise. That's the other side of the same point that we saw on the previous bullet. The larger the size of the filter, if you do an averaging filter, it leads to more blurring, obviously. It's also more expensive to compute. Smaller filters means the number of operations is going to be lesser. So a 3x3 filter has 9 operations in a non-separable case, but a 5x5 filter has 25 operations. What about the boundaries? This is perhaps a question that would have been in your mind all through. So when you do convolution, we said that if you have an input image, if you have a kernel, you convolve and you get an output image. But we said that for a particular location at the output image, you have to place this 3x3 kernel at that particular location in the input image. And if you now place this 3x3 kernel on one of those edge pixels, there is no value outside the image to be able to perform that linear combination, which means you'll only be able to place these output pixels 1 pixel into the input image if you had a 3x3 filter. Obviously, if that was a 5x5 filter, you'll have this impact for 2 sets of border pixels all around the image. What do? Do we have to lose information? Will the output image be smaller than the input image? So if you have a 100 x 100 image and a 3x3 filter, because placing it at that very edge means 2 pixels will be outside, which you don't have values for, will your output become lesser? The answer turns out to be yes. The output will become the size 98 x 98 in this particular case. What do we do if we want the output image to be the same size as the input image? We can do what is known as padding. Without padding, yes, we lose out information on the boundaries and the output image will be smaller than the input image depending on the size of the filter. But there are many strategies for padding your input image with certain values so that you don't lose that information. Let me show a few examples. So you can do what is known as zero padding, where you simply pad beyond your image with black pixels. So now you can place your filter at that corner location. You simply will have black values for the filter coefficients that go outside the image. You can wrap your image. So whatever is here, so if this was 2 pixels, you simply just wrap those 2 pixels towards the other end. You can clamp the values, which means whatever values you have at the output, at the last value there, you just continue with the same values outside the image. You can mirror those values at the edges, so on and so forth. So in each of these cases, if you did say an average filter, these are the kinds of outputs that you would get. As you can see, there is not too much variation, but for the variation at the edges, and the larger the image becomes. So these are cases where we have taken very low resolution images, but the larger your images become, the output of these padding strategies don't change too much from a visual impact. So let's end this lecture with a couple of questions for you. So we went from defining cross correlation and said that it has a problem when you deal with an impulse signal, and then defined convolution. And then we talked about a few elegant properties that convolution has, which correlation does not have, and then gave a few examples. Now, one question that lingers is, Do we need cross correlation at all? Can it be completely replaced by convolution in all kinds of applications? Think about it. We'll answer this in the next lecture, but please do spend some time thinking about it. And the other question here is, why should we take a linear combination? Why cannot we take a non-linear combination of local neighborhoods of an input image? Obviously, in our case, we defined a linear filter that way, but let's try to see if this can be made non-linear. Think about it, and we'll answer these questions in the next lecture. So for this lecture, these are your readings with the specific section numbers listed here. Please do read them as a follow-up.